What's up, y'all? Y'all are listening to Living Corporate's flagship podcast. If you didn't know, Living Corporate helps organizations build employee engagement and market trust through data analytics and data transformation, our e-learning platform, and brand marketing storytelling. We're so excited for you to be here today. The conversation you're about to hear is going to connect the dots between employee experience and go-to-market effectiveness. If you're not ready, get ready. Here we go. Kimberley Bryant. I wanted to make sure the red light was red lighting. You know what I'm saying, Ms. Bryant? Because sometimes I jump in and it cuts me off, so I just wanted to make sure. So, first of all, welcome to Living Corporate again. The last time we had you on, it was May 2022, so it's been some time. How have you been? How are you doing?
I am well. I want to say first, I'm like super grateful to be in this space with you again and in conversation. And when we were just thinking about when it was the last time, I was like, wow, like I was in such a very different space at that time when we had spoken. And it's interesting to be where I am sitting now and building again, telling my story in ways I had never thought I would. And so I'm really honored.
Well, no, thank you. And look, I don't want, for those who've been following Living Corporate, I mean, those who haven't, right? Like, I'm thankful for the fact that we have a relationship, right? Like we had an advisory board. You're a member of our advisory board for a while. We keep in contact, of course, keep in touch. And, I'm just thankful, that you're here. I think to that end, the last time we spoke, we talked a lot about your journey at Black Girls Code and the work that you were doing then, as well as kind of like what was happening with the organization that you founded, that you started, and some of the acts of erasure at that time. But we were kind of also in the thick of it. So while that conversation was candid, I think the story wasn't complete yet, right? Like to your point, like it's almost 3 years later, so much has changed, life has happened, things have shifted. So I'm just excited for us to sit down again. I really want to talk about the work and state of nonprofit and Black women founders and tech, and I want to have that conversation. I think, first of all, it's evergreen, but certainly it's relevant, highly relevant to where we are today, like socially, economically, politically. But before we get into all of that, let's just start with like your beginnings and why Black Girls Code for you, and what was it like getting that started all those years ago?
That's a great question. I think for me, I would answer that in two ways, and maybe even in three parts, if you will. So in the beginning, when I came to a realization that there was something missing in the tech space, I often tell the story. I've told it so many times, of the origin story of Black girls being created. Not necessarily because I wanted to go into a nonprofit industry. It was because of my daughter. My daughter Kai, and her interest in coding or in technology at such a young age, and finding that the industry was not really built to be welcoming to her or accessible. And I'm like, even now that she's 25, 26, I always forget, but at her age, she's still like my baby. It's still a very hard industry for a woman, and particularly a woman of color, to navigate in. But I created Black Girls Code literally to make space, a safe space, if you will, for my daughter to like pursue her passions. And it became much bigger than I ever imagined it to be. I think that what I found once I did create the organization and we started our path to expansion and scale and growth was that it wasn't going to be an easy journey at all to navigate the industry and the space, especially in a way that made it very clear, if you will, that Black women belonged in that room, and that Black women had always belonged in that room, and that we were going to be able to take up some space in ways that many that are still there now did not want us to in that moment. I think now post Black Girls Code and my journey as a leader in this space, having, experienced the challenges, the blockages, if you will, even the betrayals and erasures that I myself have survived. I find that in this new chapter with Ascend and Black Innovation Lab is that, there's stories or conversation we weren't having. Like, we spent all this time talking about how do we get Black girls into the technology, into these roles, etc. But we didn't spend enough time talking about what happens when we are there, and certainly what happens when we're there and holding the hat or baton of leadership. Because I think it's not just about professional success for these girls or even Black women or how we get the work done. It's like, how do we survive once we get into these spaces? How do we maintain and how do we protect our legacy? And certainly, how do we do it in a space of structures and infrastructures that are literally designed to diminish us? And how do we not replicate those patterns in our own systems? And so, when in this third act, if you will, from my story and what I'm doing now and writing my book, Ascending, that's what I think about. Like, how do we reclaim our power as Black women? And it's not, in my perception, like about chasing this external validation that we see so much, but it's how do we build ecosystems where we can not just survive, but that we can thrive within, and where our brilliance is seen, and not only that our brilliance is seen, but it's protected, and where we don't have to negotiate our worth. And I think that is something that we have not talked about enough, and I see it. This pattern being replicated and taught to the next generation. And I think that's something we need to sit with, because we can't replicate the same systems that have harmed us and expect our girls to thrive within them.
First of all, just thank you. I think my first point of commentary is around the fact that, and I've said this so many times to several other Black women, I think there's like this pattern where Black women are so community and communally driven. So, so often, especially I would think, like, I'm going to say in my generation, I'm not going to talk back about, but there is a meta narrative of black women serving and giving beyond themselves to help, and like really almost put themselves last in the spirit of trying to help and lift up everybody else. And we've also seen a pattern of Black women being discarded because of that, to the point almost where they're really like the mammification of Black women, like the muling of Black women, the expectation that Black women are just here to be extracted and pulled from. And then I do often see, and I have seen in the corporate context and entrepreneurial context, and certainly in nonprofit context, like the ongoing expectation for that, and training up the next generation of Black women to do the same. And it's frustrating.
Yeah. I was talking to this sister, like one of the things that I have been doing, and I love it, I enjoy it so much, is talking to other leaders, both in nonprofit, but also startup founders, and a lot of Black women. Since I, transitioned from my role at BGC, I've been doing a lot of like conversation counseling. And I was talking to this sister like last week, a couple weeks ago, that I was talking to her about her board search and being on board. And she shared something with me, and I was like, no, I'm going to write that down. She was like, well, someone told me a long time ago that we should be focused, or you should give from your excess and not your essence. And have you ever heard that before? But it's basically like what the core is. Like, we as Black women tend to come into these spaces, build them up absolutely often from nothing, and hold the whole movement on our back and give it all. Like, we don't just give 100%, we give like 150, but then we don't have anything left for ourselves. And so it sort of like clicked when she said that. I was like, yeah, I'm going to write that down, because when I transitioned from, my role and my work with Black Girls Co., I really had a lot of space. I had spaciousness for the first time in like a decade. And, like, I never took a sabbatical for 10 years of building that movement. Never took a sabbatical. Thought about it. Never had time because, with so much going on. By the time I thought, like, maybe I should take a sabbatical, then the pandemic hit. Like, what was I going to do? sabbatical then when I was trying to make sure the organization survived. So like I never took a real break. Vacations, yes, but a break for me to just think, have space, never took it until I had to. And I was telling someone this like a few days back that like, yeah, I was ready to go by the time I left my organization, but I wasn't ready to go
Right.
like that. I wasn't ready to go like that, but I've been thinking about it for a long time and like telling my team, like, yeah, like, I got to build this bench because I want to move on. But there was always another problem to solve. There was always another um, protection to build to make sure the legacy lived on. And I didn't think about, well, what
Mm.
about me as the
Mm.
legacy, right? And so I stayed. And then the universe, God, Jehovah, pushed me literally in the back and said, no, girl, get your butt. I got something else for you to do. I said, stop. And I was like, yeah. I was like, he was probably telling me that for a couple of years, even before that. He'd been telling me things, and I just didn't listen, right, to the voice, the intuition, whatever. And then the universe pushed me on to like where I need to be next. And I think of that often from Black women as leaders. Like, we carry so much in these heavy bags, and we're carrying it, and we're doing for everybody else except for ourselves. But it doesn't work that way in terms of us being able to survive, to breathe, to even hear like the voice of what we're supposed to be doing, what is our calling, because we too heads down doing all this work. And so like that's part of like what this time and space has given me. Like let me examine that within myself. So let me create space where sometimes, like if it wasn't for you, Zach, I may not be on this podcast on a Friday because I do not do those things on a Friday. I don't even take meetings on Fridays and Mondays anymore. I use that for some space to think, to listen. Maybe I'm outside of my garden, but I need that space, and we need that space to replenish ourselves. And like I found it now, and so like I'm thinking about that as I'm writing, like this paradox that Black women face, that we're the backbone of these movements and institutions, and we lead this innovation, but there's nobody there to protect us. And often we're not even credited for that work when we leave. And so we lead from the front, and we're building these things from the ground up, but they were still facing this exclusion and erasure, and that takes the toll. And that's what the root of burnout, and we question ourselves, and it creates this fatigue. But I want us to live, to breathe another day for myself and others. And I think that's some
Mm.
deprogramming we have to work on within ourselves, and some healing that has to be done so that we can teach our girls how to not just survive, but to live a life that's sustainable.
It's interesting because I think like there's these two extremes, right? And I have experienced like in my corporate life as well as in my entrepreneurial life, I've experienced both. And of course, like I'm speaking in extremes, there's also it's a spectrum. But I would say like on one extreme, there's the person who I see who is just pouring to your language the essence. They're pouring their essence out, and they're just hollowing themselves out for this broader mission to help this community. But they're giving from themselves, and oftentimes, giving from a negative balance until they burn out. And then I also see like what's the word? Like the DEI celebrity, the the person who's like always on like the latest magazine that they paid for to be on the cover of, or their some feature article, or a lot of self inflation and self congratulatory posturing and work. And I've even seen Black and brown folks in that first camp get pushed out, only for another Black or brown person to be installed in, who is a part of the second camp. Like, can we talk
Yeah.
a little bit about that? Like what you've seen in that regard, maybe what you've experienced, like, because I find it to be pretty astounding, like pretty incredible to watch in real time. And I have some theories as to why those things happen, but I would love to hear your perspective on it.
Yeah, I think a very profound observation, but it's something that has been, I want to say, echoing through a lot of different disparate conversations that I've been seeing in many places over the last, certainly this year. But I think, we can see it right in our own political reality right now. This cult of celebrity, that's how we ended up literally where we are in America. But we see that even in our spaces, in our movement spaces, in the nonprofit industrial complex. Because I think of it through this whole scarcity mindset, right? And scarcity, that's a colonial tool. That's a tool of white supremacy. And it's made so that we think there's only room for one or two of us at a time. There's not enough for everybody, right, to do this work or to get recognition. We can only have one or two at a time. And those one and two at a time got to be as close to whiteness as we possibly can be, because that's the way they succeed. And although we say that that is not what we want as a people, we replicate that in our own systems as well. And we lean to the closest you can get to whiteness. That's what we want. That's the model. We don't want someone proximate to the community that's speaking this truth of power. Oh, no, 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 no. We can send somebody as close to whiteness as possible, and that will be our leader. And it bothers me deeply when I see that. I mean, I have experienced it, like even when I think about creating Black Girls Code, like I said, I created it for my daughter, but I created it also in my own image and her image. Like, so we were unapologetically Black, and I showed up that, like, now I had the braids, but like back in the beginning of Black Girls Code, anybody that followed us know I was rocking a fro. I was rocking a natural fro. Like, we were unapologetically Black. And that said something. Like, you were going to know, like, if I showed up to speak, this is Black Girls Code. I'm trying to look like Angela Davis, Black Girls Code. That's what that's the image I'm trying to tell you. And I think that's important, right? It was important certainly to break a system that was meant to harm us. But now too often I see, this hyper individualism that is like, I think a couple of days I was texting you, as we often do, and I texted you something, a post that I saw on LinkedIn about hyper individualism and how it's literally wrecking all kinds of systems. And I don't know what the answer is. I would love to hear what your theory is, but the way I see it, I think that is something that right now has our community fractured to the point that, especially now in this moment, at a moment when we need to come together and own our essence more than any, like, that's a part of our culture that is creating fractures, these tiny fractures that make for an unstable base, and getting engineering, like, that's an unstable base. And I don't think it's sustainable. But what is your perspective?
So it's interesting, like so many people do and have, like, I was reading About Love by Bell Hooks, and in it she was talking about, like, and it was like more towards like the beginning of the book. She was talking about, like, the history of, like, the Black Power movement, and how initially, prior to the assassination of Dr. King, like, Black power was centered in, like, community and relationship, and the power was in collective organizing. And then after the murder of King, we see this pivot towards consumerism and just the worship of things, materialism. We see like the equivocation of money being power, and we see the elevation of, like, Black celebrity as liberation. And I think that, like, and like King, like, often talked about the woes of capitalism, but, like, you don't really hear a bunch of, like, Black people. I mean, like, you think about, like, the richest Black people today, the Black folks not going to be talking about, like, John Hope Bryant isn't decrying capitalism. John Hope Bryant thinks capitalism is great, right? But, like, if you were to plug him into, like, 1962, like, he would get lambasted, you know what I'm saying? But, like, that is the leading and predominant thought, like, this idea of, you got to get yours, because that's how we have Black excellence, is by having a bunch of money and going to Martha's Vineyard and you know what I'm saying, sipping wine out of, you know, gold seashells or whatever. And it's like, that's actually not like, that's not how we're going to grow. That's not how we're going to survive. But like, to your point, I think we're not even thinking like that, because individualism says, well, no, just get yours. And as you get yours, you'll meet other people trying to get theirs. And, you know, the cream will rise to the top, and you know, it'll be this talented fifth or whatever. And
Right.
that's what we need to do. And I think, so for me, like, the solution, like, I don't know, like, I think so many other millennials, I am a probably a bit tapped out. I do think we're pretty much cooked, because so many things have shifted and changed since like Reagan, like through Reagan, that Reagan era, that I'm like, man, and we are seeing it even now, to your point, when we look and we look around, it's like, hey, like, this administration, and I am not a Democrat either, so this is not about that. We have seen like an ongoing turn towards fascism. We're seeing this administration like continue to undermine and seek to erase any type of Black contribution. And I'm not even cheering on the military industrial complex. So like, at one hand, do I care that Black people are getting erased for the military and their contribution being erased from the military industrial complex? No, but do I care that it signals this larger movement to resegregate and push down and tamp down and erase Black existence from the cultural American lexicon? I do care about that. And so yeah, I mean, I'm seeing it. I think the scary part is, because we're like in a late stage capitalist society, I do believe we're gonna see individualism continue to ramp up, because that's how you make money, by like, hey, look at me. Look at what I'm doing. Look at how I am different. Yes, there's this organization, but the organization really serves as a backdrop to me. Make sure you give me the sponsorships. Make sure you give me the book deals. Make sure you give me the speaking engagements. Right? And so, you know, part of me wonders if, does it all have to crash? Like, does it have to really, really, really crash? Like, right, it's crashing right now. But part of me wonders, does it just all need to like completely fail? I'm ranting now. Go ahead, please.
No, but I agree with you. And I see that. I always said if I went back to school to study economics, I would want to really dive into some research around where Black people were as a community in the time of segregation, in those years of segregation, and what happened post integration. Like, what happened, right, to all these thriving Black business districts that we had created, these internal and sometimes informal networks of Black success that were built on the back of collectivism, right? And because that's what it was. It was collectivism was how we survived, is because we would go to the Black barber. I would go to the Black beauty shop that's around the corner in my neighborhood. You know, we had this internal mindset of collectivism that we somehow let slip away once we got into those rooms because of integration. And we kind of forgot how to move as a collective. And so, like, I think about this a lot in my work now with the Send and Black Innovation Lab, because like I'm literally building this thing from the ground up. And it seems every time I find like, oh yeah, let me build, this is what I'm building, let me build this thing with you, I can't ever get the traction there that I want for the person, because it's like, okay, I gotta keep doing my dream, but then I can't help you with your dream and then come up with the dream together because I gotta get mine. And I'm like, wait a minute, y'all, that's not how it works. And that's not how it works. And I think of it from your perspective of now that we're seeing everything that we have already accomplished systematically erased. I think that hyper individualism, it is going to fail at its own. It's going to come to its own demise. Like it's going to, because there's no way we can make it alone. So this concept of like, I'm just going to keep running this Black ass organization over here, and I'm going to be on this stage, that stage, but I'm not going to talk about like how we got to this place. it's not going to work. It's not sustainable that way in a system that is literally, I ain't going to even say trying to erase your history and everything you've accomplished. It is systemically
It's doing
doing
it.
that every day.
It's yeah.
And so now, what you gonna fall back on? Just that I'm this and I'm that and I'm the chosen one. That doesn't work, right? In this type of, it does not work in this type of
It doesn't, and I
environment.
think like I was thinking about this recently. Like there are so many people who I know who are they're being let go from their jobs, and they're like brilliant people, right? But like if you look
Mhm.
at like we're gonna pivot a little bit into like because I do want to talk about like this tech landscape a bit. Um, if you notice, like if you look at like LinkedIn and pretty much any
Yeah.
platform, right? Video continues to be the rewarded piece of content, right? That's going to get you the clicks. That's going to get you your dopamine hit. Drop some video. And what I've observed, and even like with LinkedIn Learning, I remember like Living Corporate, our LinkedIn Learning agreement is through our audio podcast. And I remember I reached out and I said, hey, I don't want to drop, I'd like to give y'all some more. Can we license some more content? They were like, nah. I was like, cool, we're going to build our own learning platform. But what was interesting in that they said, the nah was because they said, we're really looking for people to really give us video. We're looking for video type content. And as I pause and I think about like what's happening in this landscape, where it's like this hyper focus on influencer type content. And so we're seeing like this rise of the individual digital media influencer, which like 10 years ago was cool because it was differentiated because there weren't a million influencers. There might have been like a couple thousand, but there weren't like everybody was not an influencer. So the point of differentiation was you had a small pool. Most people were like a lot of people working 9 to 5 jobs. It wasn't like, but like if you look at the landscape today, Kimberly, like everybody's trying to drop content. Everybody's trying to do a TikTok, a commentary on a commentary, and it's scary. And I'm this what you just said hit me because I'm thinking about this landscape where very few people have 9 to 5 jobs and everybody's an influencer. So now you have this large, almost surf class of people who are like cheap billboards that you can pay a couple $1,000s to if you're lucky or whatever per 100,000 views. And everyone's kind of just rattling their cup talking about how they're an individual. And so now you've like effectively sectored off and isolated the working class into like begging corporations for money to survive. And it's like, man, like what if, and I'm not against influencer type content. Like I have a podcast, like obviously like I like to create content. I think that it's just a scary season and I'm hoping for and looking for, and I'm going to continue to advocate for collective organizing and just collective critical thought because we're careening towards a time and a place where, I mean, there's going to be more influencers than there is corporate gigs, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I say that as someone who I don't have a podcast yet. And I say yet because you and I have certainly talked about this, been talking about it probably since 2022. We don't have it yet, but like
Maybe.
maybe will come. And I certainly have been someone who is seen like a thought leader. I'm like been real active on social media, definitely active on LinkedIn, and I post there a lot. But I try to usually post. I won't say like, oh, well, I'm better than, but I do try to usually post things where I'm not just saying like, oh, I went to this event and I was the speaker here and I did this. I try to really say like, oh, this is what I'm thinking about right now, or like I saw this happen and this is my reaction to what's happening in this social context. So like I'm trying to post things that spur thought, that spur conversation, and not just things that are purely adulation. But the things that I see, and like when I was on the platform a day or so ago, I was like, oh, this too much. Like it's every time I'm seeing the, I would say 75% of the posts are like people posting their accolades, their awards. I got this award, I got this, da, da, da. And that's great because I think we should be able to celebrate our accomplishments. But if that's all you got to give me on a daily basis, it ain't working for me, right? And so I think, like, as we're in this society that thrives on this individualism and this self-adulation, I think we have a choice, though. Like, we have a choice on which voices we amplify and which voices we get the microphone to, and we have to make a conscious effort to think about, like, who we passing the mic to now. Is this person really in the weeds and community doing the work? Or this person posting every day about, like, well, I am a role model because I did this and this and that. Like, no, that's not what it is, right? And I also think of it in this concept of being very important for Black people in this moment. Another thing I've been thinking about, like, who gets called a
Hmm.
genius, right? Who gets to be able to wear the mantle of being a genius? Is it the person that is truly, like, exhibiting brilliance, or is just the loudest voice in the room, who therefore gets seen a lot, right? So, like, if we look at it outside of our Black community, look at who's getting called a genius now in our society. Is that person a genius? Hell no. That person is
Mm-hmm.
not a genius. That person is breaking everything. They don't even know what they're doing. And, like, those of us that see it, we're like, how did this dude get called a genius? That's not what brilliance is, right? And so I think it's a bit of unlearning that we have to do, because there's genius in, like, care work, there's genius in organizing, there's genius in healing, and we need to create some spaces that award that as what genius looks like, right? Not just those that are so eager to get this individual applause. And so I think that is going to take some relearning, some rewiring of our mindsets and concepts of what genius, like, truly looks like. As you mentioned Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks is a damn genius. That's what genius looks like, right? Someone who can parse what's happening in society and put it in a tangible way so that we can use it even when they're not here. That's genius. Not just the person that posts all these posts and they're on. That's not genius. And so, like, I think my prayer for the
Hmm.
next generation is that they can kind of, I want to say, rewire this notion, or and maybe even break the machine that, like, we have been, like, kind of grown in and churning, and it's something that's more real. Because what I see right now, it doesn't feel
Hmm.
real to me. And right now, that's what I need. That's what I crave. I crave
And
realness.
it's to your point about, like, folks posting their accolades. The wild part is, like, once you really see on the other side, this is no shade to people who get awards, but, like, so many of those awards are based on who you, like, based on your own self promotional tour, who you paid, who
Mm,
you know. Like, I mean, they're not always merit driven awards. It's about who sponsored you to put you on that stage, because you're going to do X, Y, and Z for them on the back end. Like, there's so much. There's so, I mean,
yeah.
when I found out, and this is not what you're saying at all. This is like a very silly, like, simplistic observation, but I think but related though. So when I was a kid, honestly, I was shoot up until like 3 years ago. I thought, like, to get a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, I thought that was like something, you had to, like, I thought it was something different. You find out later, like, okay, no, you donate to a nonprofit and then you do some appearances. It just, it costs bread. It costs money. Now, there's some other boxes you need to check. It's not like you can just purely buy it,
Mm,
but it's not like this, like, mysterious merit driven thing, like, oh, yo, like, you're gonna just get a star. Like, no, there's things you got to do. There's hands you got to shake, and babies you got to kiss, and money you got to pay. And so
right.
I hear you, and I do hope that we can continue to deprogram. Excuse me, thank you.
That's, that's okay.
But I do hope that we can continue to deprogram, and I do believe that there's work and there's opportunity there. And I do, as I think about people in my community, I think about the Cam Wards of the world. I think about the Jackie Claytons, and other people, Madison Butler. I think about people in my community who I do believe understand and are thinking more communally, and each one teach one, reach one, and lift as you climb. those things are important. Let's talk a little bit. We've talked about Black Girls Code. I'm gonna ask you one more question about that, and then I do want, and then we're gonna step out of the past and talk about the present and future. So, what does it look
Absolutely.
like for you? As you see Black Girls Code continue, and they're I think they're still, obviously they still exist. You are no longer part of that organization. What feelings have you had to navigate as you still see that organization move forward? Like, what is that like for you?
Oh, that's a great question. I have mixed emotions, right? So like I have been writing this book, and as I have mentioned before about my journey, and I call it like a memoir and a manifesto. So like it's a memoir from the standpoint like I'm sharing my experiences, but it's also a manifesto about how we should protect, Black women who lead and create these legacies, if you will. So it's a bit of both. But I guess in typical engineering mode, like when I go into a thing and doing a new thing, like I really like go in. I got to learn how to do this thing right. So I was very adamant. I have been very adamant about like, yeah, I want to write this book. I want to write like 90% of it, as much as possible. I don't want a celebrity writer. So like I've been writing, and I've been in these writing workshops to help me to become a better writer in that way, because it wasn't a skill set I did on a daily basis. And I have wrote this one section in my book, in one of my chapters, about being forced out of my company. And I was describing it like it was like I lost a child, and being stripped of, I think I said something like having something taken away that you gave birth to is the deepest betrayal. I described it something like that in a passage. And when I shared it with my fellow classmates, for review, we're workshopping our work. Some of my fellow classmates was like, "Oh no, Kimberly, oh, it's like you didn't tell us that you lost your daughter. Your daughter passed. Like I didn't know that. Like, why you mentioned that before?" And I was like, "Wait, what?" I was like, "No, I'm not talking about my child, my baby. I'm talking about this organization. I'm describing it as a baby, as my baby." And they was like, "Oh," and someone even said like, "Oh, I never heard of a company." Now this person wasn't, any founder would get it, but like this person wasn't that. And so you're like, "I never heard of a company being described as that." And I was like, "Well, yeah, duh." But then, like after the class, a few days later, I thought about that. I thought about that comment, like I really thought about that comment. And of course, I went back and, made sure that part of the chapter was explicit and clearer, because my baby Kai is still on this earth. God, blessing, bless God. But I was like, nah, they made a point, and I was like, that was a message, and I needed to hear it, right? Because I was like, placed so much emphasis on having this tangible material thing, this position, this title, this organization. And was that important? Absolutely. But was it as important to me as Kai, my birth daughter? Hell no. And so, like, if I got to make a choice, you want to take something from me, take that. Take that thing. You want that thing? Take it. Take it. Because my child, my body, physically, human child is way more important to me. My family is way more important to me. And so in that moment, years later, I had to give myself a recheck of my value system right in that moment. Like, if you want that tangible thing so bad, you got to push me out and take it. It's not important, because these things are more important to me. And so it was a values readjustment, a realignment, or just a no, because I certainly feel that way. But I was just thinking like, no, you reassess the thing you think you lost. Like, reassess that, remind yourself what's really important. So there's that. But then also, last week I was in Atlanta for this convening with Black women, PhDs, educators, leaders, practitioners in STEM. And we were having, like a 1-day master session on research about Black girls and women in STEM, and what's missing in the research, what we need to do with the research, yada, yada, yada. And there were people in this room who I had met when I was first starting Black Girls Code. And, there are people who started their organizations, their work, finished their PhDs after Black Girls Code and had included Black Girls Code in our programs, in their thesis, their workshop, their work, etc. So that it was really like a through line, full circle moment, if you will, to be in that room and to be asked to be in that room and contribute to the conversation. Now we're in there from the beginning of the day to the end of the day in this Microsoft building downtown Atlanta. And right until the end of the meeting, I'm just sitting there in the room, like listening to discussion. And I see outside, this room is like surrounded by glass windows. I see outside this little girl walking out of the Microsoft building. And she was swagged out. She looked like she might be middle school, but she was swagged out in a Black Girls Code t-shirt. She had Black Girls Code bag. She was, walking like she was walking to the bus stop. I don't know where the child was walking. But I looked and I was like, this little girl with all this Black Girls Code stuff on. And I'm looking at the window. I started looking around, see if anybody else sees her. It's Friday. It's Friday afternoon. There was no workshop going on. It was just this little girl swagged out in Black Girls Code stuff. Didn't know the girl. I couldn't even see the girl's face because I couldn't even get my phone. I was like, I'm going to take a picture. I couldn't even get my phone and open it and get the camera. I just got a backup picture. But I thought also in that moment, I felt so strongly. And I think about that. I was like, was that an angel? Did I just see that? Because in that moment, especially that day, at the end of the day, being in that room, it felt like a little whisper from the universe saying that, girl, your work is done. Like you did that. That's your legacy. It's walking. It's right there. And you don't have to be there for the legacy to survive. They don't have to have your name on the website for your legacy to survive, because that's the legacy. And so I think about that. Both, I hold both of them, being able to let go of a thing, but being able to feel some fulfillment about, like, that's I don't know that little girl. I'm in Atlanta. I live in the Bay Area. I don't know that little girl. They wasn't having no workshop, but I was there in that moment to see that. 10 years plus, 10 plus years, almost 20 years now later than when I started that thing. And I feel so much power in that. But in saying those two things, I would say that I still feel, though, that it is important that when we see wrong, when we see betrayal, when we see the erasure, the attempted erasure of Black women and their legacies, like we have a responsibility to call that out. And I think, like, far too often, like, we're taught to take the high road, like, to move in. Like, when they go low, we go high. Much as I love Michelle, girl, that wasn't it. Like, no.
I'm getting lower than you. I'm going to hell with you. Like,
so, I mean, it's important. I mean, it's like, tell the truth, shame the devil. And it's not about blame. It's, it's about accountability. Because when we tell this truth, I think we make some space for others to do the same. So, like, I think we have to push back on that notion that we can't name harm, we can't name betrayal, we can't name erasure. I think we have to. I think because naming the betrayal, like, that's an act of liberation in and of itself.
I mean, I think also, so, courage is a virtue because it's not common. And if people see that you're unwilling to be courageous for yourself, they're much less likely to be courageous on your behalf. So, like, I do believe it's important to teach people how to treat you. And listen, there's a bunch of stuff that how folks have done me in my corporate career, and shoot, even as I've had living corporate, that I don't talk about. But there are things that I do talk about. And I'll be transparent and say right now that there are some people on LinkedIn, I'm waiting for them to say something just so I can say something. Every now and then I just scroll up and let me see what Shannon Schuyler talking about. She better not say nothing stupid. But it's true though, right? Because people are people aren't going to. I think this idea of like, okay, well, I'm gonna let it pass and then wait for others to advocate for me, whatever the case is. I think the other part is when you don't advocate for yourself, you also are taking the opportunity away for other people to support you who literally just may not know. Like that,
Right.
that's like I think we underestimate how many people actually care about us. And so it's like, man, if I had known that person did that, I would have said something. Why didn't you say something? And so 100% like that liberation. I think I was talking to, we had, and I don't know, like, I don't know what, like, this may have released by the time this comes out, but we had Yvonne Hutchinson on, and we were talking about this idea of courage. And I used to think, and I think it was presented to me this way. I would talk to older Black professionals, and they would kind of present courage as like, hey, you only have so many chips to play. You only have so many cards to play. So you know, you got to wait. And so it was a lot of, you got to wait. Okay, well, that's not the moment. You got to wait. But see, I don't think that courage is as much a card to play as it is a muscle to exercise. And so like what happens is a lot of people who like wait to be courageous, they be old cowards. Like they never courageous. And so then it's like, well, dang, okay, you 64 years. No, and I'm not saying you old. Not, and I'm not talking about you in general. You're 64 years old. You've been working for 40 something years. You ain't said shit your whole career. You've seen all this stuff happen, come and go. Now you want to say something. Well, you don't even know. Now when you try to speak, you don't even know how to even advocate now. Because it's your first time speaking up your whole life. Right? But I've seen that. Like, I've seen senior partners at consulting firms, Black folks, who try to wait until they about to retire. Then all of a sudden they pro-Black now. All of a sudden they care about Black Girls Code now. All of a sudden they want to speak up on something. But at that point, you dead man walking. They know you about to get up out of here. They don't care. Your leverage is gone. Your influence is gone. And so, you know, I love that. Look, before we get out of here, though, let's talk about Innovation Lab, because you've been working on this and you continue to build and work on it. You've talked about it in this conversation. What was the spirit and motivation behind Innovation Labs? What are y'all doing now? And what are you excited about that y'all are building?
Well, there was two things that happened when I left Black Girls Code. And as I mentioned, you know, like I took this time to have some spaciousness, but I also like really set in what I wanted to do next, because I felt like that wasn't the end for me. That wasn't the end of the road for me. That was a pivot, and perhaps it was a pivot that was pushing me through where I actually needed to be, where God expected me to be, right? And I started just organically talking to lots of different founders like yourself. I think that was around the time you had asked me to join your advisory board. I was, you know, started investing in some startups on my own and having these conversations with other founders. And I saw like that what we really needed wasn't a lot of coaching. It wasn't, you know, just pure advice. Mentorship. We need some funds. We need some dollars, so that we can get some things off the ground, whether that's for-profit or nonprofit. And so I was like, yeah, I want to do something about that, because I remembered like how difficult it was for me, like in that first year starting BGC, when I was just out of my bank account, you know, and that's all we had. And when we got that first $50,000, you would have thought we had got 100 million, because that's what it felt like. And I was like, yeah, I want to help founders get from 0 to 1. And I just sort of also serendipitously found that there was a need, this huge need to build and support founders in the South, because I live in California, but I'm from Memphis. And that is where there is so much talent. You were in the South. I call where you are South, at least. And there are brilliant founders there that don't get seen because they don't live in California. They don't live in New York, or they may not be one place in the South where there's some momentum. They ain't in Atlanta. So like, how do you get support to these other founders? So I felt that is where this new movement, this new transfer of my skills should reside, in my hometown in Memphis. And so I really started to kind of build this idea of creating Black Innovation Lab, which will be an accelerator to support founders, especially those from marginalized communities from the US South, but also really try to invigorate this sort of Black tech Wall Street movement in a city that's one of the blackest in the South, in the nation. Not even just the South. Memphis is one of the blackest cities in the nation. But you don't ever hear about the talent there. You hear about all the problems. And not to say there's no tech there. There is tech there. There is STEM, but not as much of a startup, a vibrant startup economy like you might see in Birmingham or Atlanta. And I wanted to be part of that. And so that's like literally where I've been kind of like putting all my brain energy from building in the Nexus, creating this concept of Black Innovation Lab to get founders from 0 to 1. I've been investing like in founders, like not just in the South, like taking my own angel investment, writing these checks, investing in founders for the last 2 years and learning as much as I can so that I can take everything that I've learned, all the contacts that I have, and create something in the place that birthed me, something that lasts. And I think it's important as well to, you talked about the tech industry. I feel like we spent the last 10 years trying to get people into Google, trying to get people into Microsoft, trying to get people into here, there. And I'm like, no, we got that. I said this in the meeting with the women on Friday. I was like, we got that wrong, y'all. Like, it's not about trying to get our girls or boys a seat at a table. Why are we having that conversation? We need to be teaching them how to create their own table. We need to build our own. We need to create our own space. We need to talk about ownership and equity. I think when you and I first started talking, when you were in your concept of scale, I was telling you like, Zach, no. You don't need this VC money. Like, yeah, you might need this VC money, but I'd rather you look for another way.
We had those
I told
conversations.
you this. I was like, VC is a predatory industry, and it is not made for us. It's not made really for nobody. It's looking for a unicorn. That's the nature of the beast. And yet I see so many of us, myself included, looking at VC as a vehicle as opposed to trying to see how we can re-envision how we can utilize that tool or change that tool so it's not so predatory. Because for me, I'm all about, in this next decade, all I want to do is figure out how we create collective wealth. How do we create collective power? How do we create generational wealth? Not just get one person into Microsoft. That is not generational wealth. And that's not what I want to do. I don't want to spend my last little bit of time before I retire. I'm going to be out in my garden, on a farm. That's my vision. So they come to the universe. I want my own patch of earth that I own and grow my vegetables and flowers. But before then, I want to figure out how we can reclaim abundance. And not just for me, but how do we reclaim abundance for the community? And I think it's about more than asking for seats. We've got to build our own house.
Man, Miss Bryant, it's phenomenal. I'm just so thankful to be in community with you. I'm glad that we've kept up our communication relationship. I continue to cheer you on and see the work that you're doing. The attitude and the mindset you have is just so encouraging, especially from an older generation. Like, that's dope to see. I think... Nah, because some of y'all be tripping, yo. Some of y'all Black Gen X or baby boomers be hurting me. I'm like, come on, man. Like, this is...
Y'all gonna put... I need y'all to stop. Look, can we end on that note? Can y'all please stop putting Gen X in there?
That's fair. That's fair. No, they're not the same. They are not the same. No. So 100%. I want us to end here. I'd like to say this. When I think about the future of work, and I think about ways that organizations who are seeking to continue to be competitive and capture the next generation of talent, they're going to continue to need to revamp and reimagine what incentive looks like. Because this idea of like, hey, we can give you this track where you can be our billboard for a couple dollars is just not going to appease the highest talent within any stakeholder group or demographic. And like everything you said about, hey, it's not about just getting a little kiddie seat at this big table that you're not going to have a voice at. That's a podcast for another day. It's about giving you tools so that you can actually build something and innovate And then like we as company can figure out ways to partner, collaborate, invest, and grow with you. Right. Like that, I even as I say that, that sounds so altruistic. Like it sounds almost unrealistic, but I do believe there's going to be companies and brands out there that are thinking about, they're looking at this next class, or they're looking at the top talent and figuring out, okay, we got to figure out something different and creative to really retain those people, because Gen Zers and Gen Alpha's not going to care. They're not the same. Like they've grown up in like, they're growing up in like some of the most economically pressured and stressed environments. So like this idea of like just giving them some pocket money is not going to be appealing, because this dream of having a house and a picket fence and a dog and being, you know, married by 28 or whatever, like that's just not the reality anymore. And so organizations who are seeking to attract and retain that talent are also going to have to rethink some things. So you've dropped several gems. My last question for you is, where can people find out more about you? Where can they engage you?
I'm still online. I'm usually on most every single social media app as the number 6 gems. But they can also like reach out to me on my website, blackinnovationlab.org. They can link with me on LinkedIn. They can certainly look for me soon. We keep juggling my release date, but I'm still like really like trying to run like crazy to release this book into the world next fall. I got so much to say. I want to share it. So I definitely look for people to pick that up when it's out. Maybe you will have me back next year when the book is out. We can talk about it, but I'm an open networker, so I always love for people to reach out and meet new people and talk to new people. And I would just say, I just want to leave people with one thing, because one thing I really wanted to say is that I think when we think about Black women and leadership, and that meant nonprofit, for-profit, philanthropy, whatever, I just want people to understand that when we think about Black people, Black women in particular, leadership, you know, it's a miracle in my mind. It's a gift, but it's also a blueprint. But I think that as Black women, we are often sometimes leading and carrying all this harm that's unspoken, and we need to speak truth to power. So when you see something ain't right, we need to say that, right? And we need to not just do that for ourselves. We need to do it for every Black woman that's out here right now on this earth, but also do it for all the Black girls that's looking at us and coming after us, because that is really the core of our work. That is the legacy. We got to show our girls how we treat not just others, how we treat ourselves.
Kimberley Bryant, innovator, founder, investor, mentor, author, speaker, overall dope fly individual. We look forward to having you back soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you, brother. Love you.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.